Hello, my name's Carrie-Ann Wade and I'm the Director of Communications and Engagement at North East London NHS Foundation Trust, and I am also the founder of Cat's Pyjamas Communications Limited.
Right, and you also have another role, which is Vice Chair of the Public Sector Group.
I absolutely do, here to support you, Marcus, as the Chair.
And a wonderful job you're doing too. So thanks for joining me here. Just to, as I say, this is a kind of a chat about you and about your experiences in communications and the impacts of COVID, plus a bit more about your other career, if you like, outside of your role. So I suppose the first thing is about just a bit about you, really. How did you get to where you are today? You know, what drove you to do what you do, and you know, and how do you manage that kind of? And I'll ask you a bit more about your other business as well. How do you manage balancing both of them together?
So I'm 16 years this year in healthcare comms. I've been in the NHS for 16 years, and I started out at an officer level in a patient and public engagement role. So I joined the NHS from a sales and marketing background in the private sector, and did that thing that I'm sure most of us do when we join the public sector and say we want to do something worthy and more meaningful. Yeah, I joined the NHS then in a learning disability trust, and then basically I've just worked my way up through different positions. Mostly enjoyed my time working in mental health and community organisations, actually, which is something I'm very passionate about, particularly in terms of mental health services and how we communicate about those and engage people in those services. But I guess in terms of how I got here, I just feel like I'm one of those people that says yes to lots of opportunities. So I think that's probably been the trick to kind of getting to where I am now, working at NELFT, whether that's been professional development opportunities. So I was fortunate enough to be given a place on healthcare comms postgraduate course, which was brilliant. Sort of the guinea pig on the first cohort of that, so that was a definite yes for me. But yeah, just saying yes to opportunities. Working at Oxford Health many moons ago was the place where I got my first leadership role as a head of the team, but I worked my way up from an officer level to a manager to a head of, which was really great experience, kind of taking on maternity covers and all sorts of things, really. So I think for me it's just been about seeing where those opportunities are and grabbing hold of them, really, and going for the ride to see where they take you. And
with regards to the public sector, I mean, I know from my side in the public sector, it's almost even Stevens when it comes to senior people in comms being women and men. I mean, is it the same in the NHS?
Well, I would absolutely say it feels like to me, and I know NHS providers a few years back did some research into this, it feels a more female dominated profession within the NHS, I have to be honest, but in some of the very senior leadership roles kind of outside of NHS trusts, it feels like the balance tips and it goes back to being more male dominated. But there's lots of work going on at the moment around sort of diversity within NHS communications and how do we attract more diverse talent. So I think, you know, it would be fair to say a predominantly white female heavy communications population within the NHS, so definitely lots more work to do to be more diverse, I think, in that area.
And that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because the world has moved on from thinking about the split between men and women and, you know, equality and pay and stuff. It's moved further to include diversity, and, you know, and diversity is not just in race but physical ability as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, the more we can do to make communications an accessible career for people, whether that's within, you know, the NHS or the public sector more broadly, the better, I think. And I know there's loads of really great work going on out there. If you follow people like Advita Patel with a leader like me, you know, there's absolutely tons happening around kind of diversity. I sometimes think in the public sector, although we probably have more of a mandate to be focused on diversity, we're sometimes not as creative or inventive about how we kind of manage some of that as perhaps some of our private sector comms and PR colleagues.
Yeah, you might be right there. It's an interesting world that we live in at the moment. Of course, there's outside things going on, isn't there, around society and different ways of thinking. And I mean, for example, the NHS practice blind recruiting? I mean, is that something?
So yeah, when we go through recruitment processes, when we see the application forms on application, yeah, we don't have any details about who the individual is. We just see employment history and education history, and obviously their personal statements. So up to the point where you invite somebody for an interview, you wouldn't know whether they were, you know, male or female, or what cultural background particularly they might be from. There obviously there is an option when you are recruiting into the NHS for you as somebody who's applying for a job to say that you have a disability or an impairment of some sort if you wish to disclose that. But again, of course, that's not something that people always feel comfortable doing.
And that's really positive, because not the whole, you know, other bits of the public sector that I haven't started doing that yet. So I think that's really good news. And I did mention that you also have a business running, and we've already alluded to that, haven't we? So how does that work then?
So, so I guess first of all, I'm really lucky that working in the public sector, particularly in the NHS, enables me a level of flexibility in terms of their flexible working policy. So I work full time, but I work compressed hours. So in an ideal non-COVID world, I would normally not be working every Friday. Obviously, over the last sort of 12 to 14 months, that hasn't been the case, because it has been all hands on deck, really, with managing comms through the pandemic. But yeah, a couple of years back in 2019, I kind of got to that point where I was like, what else could I do with my experience and skill set? What do I really enjoy doing? At that point in time, I really wanted to see how I could support small businesses locally in the area that I live in, Hertfordshire. So I set up Cat's Pyjamas and thought, right, I'm going to give that a go and support those businesses with their comms needs, which had been a really amazing experience. But actually over the past 2 years, and it kind of links to some of what we've just talked about, I've really realised that what I'm most passionate about is developing communications professionals. And actually, you know, there's nothing better than seeing somebody, you know, within your own profession kind of really growing and thriving and achieving. So I have pivoted Cat's Pyjamas this year to be more focused on providing sort of mentoring and support services for communicators who are looking to take the next steps in their career. So I will feel a bit nervous about it now, because that's quite new. I've just launched a group mentoring program just this week, actually, that I hope will start in June. So I'm just, as I said, seizing opportunities. I'm going to give it a go and see what happens. But I think I'm hitting that point in my life and my career where it's about, you know, what brings you passion, and trying to manage the balance between the things that bring you joy and the things sometimes you just have to get on with.
We call it a midlife crisis. You know?
Yeah, maybe I'm having one of those, Marcus. This would not be the time to work that out, would it? In the middle of a conversation with you that's going to go public. Yes, I'm creeping up to my midlife crisis, Marcus. You hit the nail on the head.
That's it. The news is out. Midlife crisis. I mean, funny enough, I mean, I kind of had a similar epiphany, or whatever it is, to you, where I was head of comms at a council, and it got to the point where I'd done everything and my team were great, and you know, I got to the point where I delegated everything. So I'd started mulling over setting up a business on the side, which I started off, and then the council politicians didn't like it. So anyway, eventually I left and went to private sector, and then set my own business up, and went through that whole journey of kind of trying to build the clients, all the rest of it. Probably I'm more comfortable doing what I'm doing now, but especially when Brexit came along and made it even harder to do that job. But anyway, so yeah, but it's quite, you learn a lot about yourself as well, I think, and but also I think one of the things that I found is that you realise you know more than you think. If that makes sense, you know, without being big-headed about it. You know, the experience we learn in our jobs. You know, and I know that it can be quite hard. You know, it can be probably similar to lots of other industries, but I find it in a public sector role, you become a jack of all trades, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. I was going to say, you know, without wanting to do down our profession, because we are experts, and that's a bugbear of mine, because I think everyone thinks they can do comms. I'm using inverted commas, because like, well, we all know how to communicate, and actually there is a real skill behind it and people bring lots of knowledge and experience, but at the same time I do think our skills are very transferable, and I think we have to know we have to know a little bit about lots of things that happen in our organisation, and then be able to kind of dig deep into those kind of key priorities to be able to operate at a really strategic level. So I think then when that comes to thinking about running your own business, you can transfer quite a lot of those skills around sort of project management, you know, understanding lots about different aspects of running a business. Although I have to say, numbers still not my thing, Marcus. So
you're a comms person, that's why.
I know, I like words, I don't like numbers. And I remember the current job I'm in my day job as a director of comms, and we did my psychometric testing as part of the interview process. And the poor chap that had to feed back to me said, you know, you did amazingly well on the verbal reasoning, but the numerical testing, he's like, numbers aren't really your thing, are they? I was like, no, that's why we have a finance department. So on the business side, the accountant is my friend.
Absolutely. And can I make a confession that as we're doing news flashes here, I went for a job at a well-known hospital in London, and that was one of my failings, was that, because, you know, I think it has become a bit of a thing now, isn't it? You know, comms people are, you know, we're creative people rather than maths people. So although we still have to manage budgets, and I can work out VAT, and
yeah, I do, and I think it's interesting. It's one of the things I've been talking about with a colleague actually, around how much, once you particularly become more strategic in your role as a communicator, you do have to learn that other stuff. You have to, you know, think about performance of your organisation, understand workforce issues, think about finances. Do you understand the, you know, profit and loss and the balance sheet of your organisation? Because you have to be able to talk about that as well as about your own profession.
Yeah, no, definitely. And as also the other bit about, I have noticed with Cat's Pajamas, you do a lot of stuff around leadership as well, which is quite interesting.
Yeah, so the one brilliant thing that Cat's Pajamas has led to for me, I guess, is I just love collaborating with people, and if I can't collaborate with people, I love facilitating that collaboration between, you know, other people. So I'm working at the moment with Lee Griffith from Sunday Skies, who is a former public sector comms director herself, and we run a series called Take the Lead live on Instagram, where we talk about you know, various different leadership issues. The first series was all about people taking their first steps into leadership, and it's interesting because communication skills come up a lot in those conversations around leadership, and so that's been, you know, a really fun experience, but quite an enlightening one as well, I think, on our part. And it's different, I think, when you run your own business, because as a comms director in the NHS, I'm very used to having to manage the reputation of my organisation and other people, and put other people into the spotlight. And then when you're a solo person running your own business, you have to become more comfortable putting yourself out there. So the Instagram live thing was terrifying, but we're kind of getting used to it now, so that's good.
I saw a couple of them and I did contribute. But,
yes, thank you very much, Marcus.
But we tend to be people behind the people, don't we, in front of the camera?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It is, yeah. I mean, I must admit, when I did, the bit I enjoyed about being self-employed is, I used to go onto the local radio station, Booster Educate, and read the papers, you know, and do stuff like that. So it was quite, you know, it was quite nice, because I was on the other side, you know, and I was tapping into my expertise in the public sector to be, you know, involved in that process. So as you said, there's always stuff you can, you know, take from the public sector into the private sector. And I think the other bit, you clearly, I've seen you do a lot of work around is women in leadership as well. So it's not just leadership, it's about, you know,
yeah, definitely. And you know, I think a lot of people are in that space now, aren't they? But I'm really lucky to work with two good friends, Jane Galloway and Lorna Reeves, on the Awesome Women's Retreat. And Jane is also someone who works in the public sector, not in communications, but has a side hustle, as she calls it, around kind of coaching. And Lorna left a public sector role to set up her own business in events. And we basically run weekend retreats for women who are either like us and thinking they've got a business idea that they might want to take forward, or they're already running their own business and they just need a bit of support. And I'm there from the sort of comms and marketing side of things, and Jane does the coaching and Lorna does the business strategy. So yeah, I'm lucky I get to collaborate with really good friends on topics that are, you know, important to me, and hopefully are having an impact for other people.
Great. It's almost like having a hobby, but doing it as work, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. But that's what I've always loved about my
mm,
communications career, and mostly because no 2 days are ever the same. I think you
yeah,
get to be involved in so many different things, and if you're someone like me who likes that, you know, I think that's a really positive to come out of working in comms.
no, totally. Your passion for comms has come through, and I must admit that's what makes me tick as well. I love doing comms, and it comes with so many different things, isn't it? And our role is, we're not going back to the point about jack of all trades, but also there's more to it than that, because we're advisors, we're counsellors, and we've got quite a lot of roles with leaders, managers, and the rest of it. So I think there's an awful lot, and just thinking that through. We've got to talk about it. Obviously, COVID. We've all lived through it. Now, I believe you've still been going into the office, have you, or has it been
Yeah,
mix and match?
it's sort of been a blended approach, if I'm honest.
Mm,
So right at the very start of the pandemic, we were in the office a lot, and we were part of our incident management teams. And I have to say, I think particularly the very beginning of the pandemic, when things were really heating up, for our organisation within the NHS, I think it really demonstrated the value add from a communications point of view, and I think it helped to change the perception of what a communications team is here to deliver, from being about the things that really bug me, like, could you just make this look pretty,
yeah,
and
tactics and
could you just find us a celebrity for an event that's happening tomorrow?
oh yeah, look.
Yeah, to actually being about the strategic value that we add, internal communications and engagement, kind of managing public messaging. So I think for our organisation, it did our team the world of good, actually. But sorry, back to your point, Marcus. Yeah, we were going in a lot at the start, and then obviously we kind of said to people, please don't come in. You're safer not coming in if you don't need to be here. So then it was mostly just some of the senior managers who were going in. But I have to say some of that was about managing other leaders' expectations, because there's still a sense that some people haven't quite got into the whole agile remote working mentality,
Yeah.
to see you to prove that you're doing your job. So I still think there's a bit of work to do around that, but very much now a blended model, and my team worked agilely, we call it in our organisation anyhow, which means they could work from anywhere, which I think put us on a good footing to be able to work from home a bit more. But yeah, our team came together, all bar 2 people, for our awards event last Wednesday, which was interestingly a virtual awards night, but the team went in to help manage and support the chief exec and chair, and it was actually really nice. I've got people in my team who haven't met each other yet, who've worked here for like over a year.
That's one of the things about COVID, isn't it? You get new recruits and they've never seen a person.
Yeah, people are amazed that we've all got legs and stuff, because they've only seen us from like the waist up. And
you don't just wear tracksuit bottoms all the time.
Yeah. I mean, that was a shock last Wednesday to not wear an elasticated waist, but anyway.
That's one of the interesting things, isn't it? Funny enough, I digress slightly, but they were talking about new fashion lines coming out, which have all got elasticated waists.
Yeah, loungewear, working from home attire.
Absolutely, yeah. So from a comms point of view, I mean, what was the impact for you as an organisation talking to staff? I mean, did it change what you do, or did you bring new things in?
We did bring some, well, they're probably not new to other organisations, but we did bring some new things in. So we have over 200 sites across North East London, Essex and Kent. So we've always been a bit of a beast in terms of how we engage and communicate with our colleagues. So we have relied a lot on virtual communications, but I think what we've been able to do through COVID is move away from purely sort of broadcast internal comms that are virtual, like the weekly newsletter, to really trying to be more engaging. So we set up a weekly webinar with our executive management team, happens every Wednesday. And I think the first week we had about 90 staff, and it's gradually grown. And we now have anywhere between sort of 400 and 600 staff on every week. And we've continued that from April, and we're going to keep it as part of our business as usual, because basically the feedback from colleagues has been, although we can't physically see you, we'd never get this level of access to the senior leaders in the organisation normally, because if the chief exec came out to do a site visit, he'd come to one site on one day, and it would take him 3 years to get round, every site if he did one a week or whatever. So I think people feel like even though it's online, they've got access to ask questions of the senior management team. They're much more visible. It's created a sort of more transparent and open approach to our communications, I think. So we've maximised the kind of virtual and digital element, but tried to make it more interactive, so we're not just pushing comms out all of the time.
That is an interesting byproduct of this. It's also, I mean, part of our role as senior people is having access to the leaders of organisations, and I found one of the really interesting things is through COVID is that access has increased because everybody now is on the end of a Skype message or Teams message or whatever. Which is also a challenging thing, isn't it? Because you're finding that in the old days you used to be in a meeting and you was in a meeting, or you was kind of traveling between meetings or whatever you do. Now, if you're working from home, you're constantly on the screen, aren't you?
Yeah.
And so it's, how do you manage that?
The screen time is a big issue, I think, for us. And I sometimes look at my diary or my team's diary, and you think, my goodness, from like 8:30 till 6, we're pretty much back to back. So we do have a big wellbeing agenda in our organisation, and as a team we always have wellbeing on the weekly team meetings call that we do, so people can raise any concerns. We have a wellbeing Wednesday where we say take an additional half an hour on top of your lunch break, and I scoffed earlier because I'm like, really, who takes a lunch break these days, which is not good practice at all, because we should, but you make that up to an hour on a Wednesday and do something that's about your own well-being. So whether that's like mindfulness or going for a walk, please do that. But I think within my team we've tried really hard, even for people working from home, to have a bit of a different approach. So we've done like walk-in phone calls. So if you're doing a one-to-one and you don't need to necessarily take notes, I've often say to my team, oh, I'm going to do your one-to-one walk-in if you don't mind. And
actually, that's a great idea. I'm going to nick that.
I probably stole it from someone else, Marcus, so I won't 100% take the credit in case somebody sends a tweet or something going, I told you about that. But yeah, so like my deputy and I had a meeting the other week, and he's in East London and I'm in Hertfordshire, but we both happened to be walking along the canal, so we're like, oh, we're having a little canal walk while we have our meeting. But just to sort of encourage people not to be stuck at the desk all of the time. One of my team's now a massive advocate for the standing up, stand up desk thing, so they've got all that sorted. So I think it's just about, some people will just stick to what they know and not want to make the time, but it's just offering those opportunities to people to do things a bit differently. And
it's also helping the organisation think differently as well, because back to that point about, there used to be a certain way of thinking and working, and the organisation I work in, we were going to that agile route and that smart hot desking and all the rest of it pre-COVID, and COVID actually forced us into that way of working. But actually what it then ended up us doing is doing this, So it's about really thinking about what that approach is, and and I don't think we'll ever go back to how we were in the old days. I don't think that's possible.
No.
Well, it isn't possible in the organisation I work, but I think we've learned a lot of lessons, haven't we, about how you actually make these things happen.
Definitely. And I think there's people in my team who, it's different people's management styles, isn't it? But I've always been an advocate for, if you deliver what you need to at the time you need to deliver it, I'm not really that bothered how you manage that. It's up to you. But I think, we talk a lot in the NHS about being very flexible in terms of like flexible working policies, but still I think there's some people are a bit old-fashioned about what that actually means. But I've got people in my team who have been homeschooling kids, and they've just been like, they work part-time anyway, but they're like, actually it suits me better that as long as I've got my, I'm in the meetings I need to be in, I'm actually doing some of the other work at like 6:30 at night after I've fed the kids and sorted them out, and I haven't, because I've had to have time to homeschool them. And I think people have just been more accepting that that's how it's had to be. So it's like, well, if it's had to be that way through COVID, why can't it be that way going forward? Totally. Because the work's still being delivered. Probably weirdly, I would say my team's been more productive, and we're now having to set expectations around, you can't have that plus because, we've happened to be more productive through the pandemic. It's now like, oh, you can do everything.
I think you're right. I mean, I think I totally agree. I think everyone's, well, I know that we've been more productive as well, but it's also been, we're now coming out of a crisis, and you can't maintain that kind of level of activity. But I think the other thing also is that you have an insight into people's lives more now as well, don't you? So in the office you still see and you have a chat around the coffee machine if you've got one or whatever it's going to be, but now you've got dogs and children and
Yeah, I've
cats
seen
and
people's pets, and
yeah.
I got jealous because I don't have a dog, so people have had to make do with seeing my hamster, which is the world's most unsociable hamster anyway. So it's like, yeah, here's Nibbles, off you go. Just
I'll go and get my goldfish, shall I?
so I was
I
free
mean, it
from the
has
barrel with
changed.
the hamster.
But I mean, it's funny how the world is, how things have changed. But I mean, in some cases remain the same, because you're still having to do, well, I'm finding now that we're getting business as usual start to come back,
Yeah.
and it's quite hard to manage that, and the kind of what was the pandemic. But the other thing I was going to pick up on is about mental health. So one of the, that's gone really up the agenda, isn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
obviously pre-COVID there was a big campaigning drive to get people to think about it, and famous people like Asda Campbell, the rest of it.
Yeah.
But actually, I think as employers, everybody's really realised how important it is, and probably one of the negative byproducts has been, that isolation and all the other stuff, and even people's relationships have broken down, and the rest of it. So how do you manage that at your place?
So we've had a really strong wellbeing agenda, which has been supported really well through my communications and engagement team. But I find it quite interesting that as a predominantly mental health trust, we provide community services as well, that actually we've probably not been as good pre-pandemic about supporting our staff's well-being as we've now discovered we've had to be. But we've had a level of investment which has been really helpful around setting up a wellbeing hub. So we have people that work in our improving access to psychological therapy services, which would normally be entirely patient facing, now running a sort of hub where people can either get online kind of virtual support through chat functions, confidential conversations. We've had to do loads more around, sadly, things like bereavement support for people, talking about safeguarding issues. So, we've seen an increase in domestic violence because people are obviously in the home more. And so I think even though some of those topics have been really difficult, the pandemic has meant that we've been forced to talk about them more. And actually, again, I think our communications have been more transparent and more supportive in terms of signposting people to places where they can get that support. We have had to have quite a lot of conversations in our organisation about not making assumptions about what staff need in terms of the support to kind of enable them to get through the pandemic. And I think, there was weirdly an assumption that everybody actually was really excited about working from home and that they loved it, without taking into account what you've said, the things around isolation. There are some people who might live, in one room, and that's the only four walls they've seen through quite a lot of the pandemic. There's people who live in shared housing where, they're not as lucky to have the space they might need to be able to work. Again, things like the domestic violence situation. So I think, we've had to be quite sensitive to those kinds of situations and not just assume that when we say everybody who can work from home should work from home, not everyone is jumping up and down with glee around that. And actually, we're already starting to see, with the easing of restrictions nationally, more people trying to come into the workplace, even though our message has been, please do still work from home where you can. We've definitely seen more people coming in, and I think they're people who, for whatever reason, for their own well-being and perhaps their sanity, want to come back and have some of those in real life connections. So it will now be about how we manage that safely, because even come June, we won't be saying, everyone can come back to every office building in the way they worked before, because there's likely to still need to be some level of restrictions around.
But the thing is, one of the things that the council that I'm working at is looking at is remote by default, and that doesn't necessarily mean you can't go into the workplace, and it doesn't mean that you always have a desk, but it means that you can go in for meetings. But why can't you then, you know, look at your emails in a cafe or whatever. So it's about thinking about, as long as we're doing our jobs,
Yeah.
whatever that job is. I know it's different if you're a nurse or a doctor or whatever, but you know, for us comms people, you know, we can be just as productive sitting here. I mean, I think in my career, I've been used to working in different locations, and I've worked on trains and God knows what else. So I think I've learned an awful lot. So as over the last couple of years, over the last year, for you as a leader, what have you learned? You know, what's changed for you, or you know, have you had to question the way you do stuff, or have you been able to say, actually, yeah, I think I've been getting it right? You know, what's been your
I'd
learning?
love to say I've been getting it right, but I think you know, you'd have to ask my team that whether I've got it right or not. I think
Very
I've
modest.
I think I've learned a lot about humility and being okay with showing your vulnerability as a leader. And actually, some of the role models I've had as not necessarily communications leaders, but leaders in general, have been more of that sort of alpha type, whether that's male or female, kind of, you know, quite elbows out, over assertive perhaps, and that's not my natural leadership style, which I sometimes have in the past felt has maybe been a negative thing for me. But actually I felt like through the pandemic, weirdly, I've probably been able to operate, you know, with the utmost of my own integrity, but be myself a bit more. And actually, you know, we're all whole human beings. We're not just work Carrie-Ann, communications Carrie-Ann, you know, home Carrie-Ann. And particularly in this situation where, you know, everything feels like a bit of a pressure cooker. You know, I have cried in front of my team when something's been really difficult and we've had to deal with, sadly, you know, a staff member passing away through COVID. But I think the team, although some of them probably found it really awkward, to be honest, but I think the team have sort of welcomed the fact, and it was like you're saying, we seem to know more about each other now, personally, and I think that's made the team feel like actually it's okay not to be okay, and we can share that with each other, and there is support out there. And sometimes I think when you're role modeling as a leader, you're constantly that person who just puts a brave face on and only, you know, is super positive. That's probably not quite as authentic as showing your true self sometimes. So I don't want people to think I go in sobbing in front of my team every day, but, you know, I think just, you know, and I think things like trying to, you know, use humor a bit, and even in the most pressured times, making some time with the team to do something that's more sociable. So, you know, we're probably all sick of them now, but having a quiz on Zoom or whatever, you know, even when we're all shattered on a Friday and we've been working 60-hour weeks at the start of the pandemic, people actually just did want a bit of that downtime and have a glass of wine together. And weirdly, again, for our team, that was enabled much more by being virtual, because we are all very far dispersed in terms of our geography. So actually trying to organise a team night out is an absolute nightmare, but doing it online has been, you know, really, really positive thing. So for me, I just think it's something about, you know, your honesty and integrity as a leader, and really just sticking to that throughout, even when it's difficult, and even if that means you get known as the crier occasionally.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it's easier because there is a blurring now of the lines between your work self and your, you know, your personal self. And you know, we're both sitting in our room, and you've got better wallpaper than I've got a backdrop. But yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There's that kind of blurring now, and but you still have to maintain a leadership role, and I think the pandemic has probably forced many people to be in an alpha kind of role, if you like. And I suppose the challenge will be, how do we start reverting to other leadership, you know, models? You know, when someone says to you, you know, what leadership style do you have? And I think your answer is probably going to be always different depending on the circumstances I'm in. In the pandemic, we've all been, you know, command and control. But as we start to come out of it, we're probably now starting to exhibit some of the other styles as well.
Sorry, just on your point about the command and control thing, interestingly, in your experience this with your communications teams that you've worked in, you were saying about being a jack of all trades and how many different projects we're all involved in. The pandemic, I think, was helpful in some ways, because we had one clear goal as a whole organisation and as a team, which was respond to the pandemic. And I think that's what enabled my team to be more productive, because actually they weren't being split into 100 different projects that have all got, you know, slightly different priorities. And I think that's now what's going to be hard as a leader and as a team, is that, you know, like you say, that business as usual coming back and having people in the team who are now working on 15 very different projects rather than one really huge one, but that the rest of the team are also working on.
Yeah, that segued quite nicely into my next question.
Oh, it's my magic.
So what do you think the future brings then with regards to, would you do things differently, or, you know, have you been able to rethink about how you do respond to those changing needs of BAU and other things?
So from my team's point of view, we are having that exact conversation now. So we've done a few debriefs around the pandemic, you know, as an organisation, but also as a communications team, around what we think's worked well and what hasn't. I think one of the things that has really stood out for us in our team has been we have roles that are assigned to localities. So they work on a whole range of different projects for a specific locality in the organisation. But actually, I think going forward, a lot of the organisational priorities for my trust are going to be more trust-wide and more corporate. So there's a huge agenda around staff wellbeing, just and compassionate culture work, lots around stakeholder engagement, which is more about how we approach that strategically. And it feels like what we've highlighted is that we might want to have a think about going down a route of being more around, you know, our specialism, so that perhaps we have internal communications, external, rather than having the jack of all trades for a locality. But it will be about how we manage that expectation in the organisation. And I also think what will change for us is around the sort of digital engagement piece. So having to be more alive to the needs of staff groups, potential new staff, our patients and communities around the digital agenda. And I think, you know, we've all seen some real positives from communicating and engaging with people virtually, but I also think we can't ignore issues like digital poverty, the fact we'll have groups of patients who just, it won't be appropriate for them to have, you know, virtual consultations. How do we manage that? And how do we have that really blended approach, not only to kind of communications and engagement, but how we deliver services in the public sector?
And I suppose that leads me on to our next question about, as an industry, what do you see changing in the future, you know, from a comms point of view?
I think we'll have to really start thinking about the channels that we use to communicate with our different audiences. I think our messages probably need to be, perhaps in one respect, they need to be simpler, because I think actually people want clear, concise messaging, but aligned with that, they need to be a bit more sophisticated, because we're going to be using different channels. So, you know, we have to think about what needs to be video, what needs to be audio, what, you know, and I think people have been doing that for some time, but I would definitely say within my sector, that's something that I think will be a challenge for us, because I think also it takes quite a lot to make that content and that output. And so it's about kind of how do we do that in a way that's effective for people and has impact, really. And I think it's just, we'll be thinking about the workforce and how do we communicate and engage with a disparate workforce who might all be working now in a very different way to how they were working before. So I think, you know, internal communications and engagement, you know, has never probably been more important than it is now, but it's about being creative and innovative in the ways in which we kind of manage that in our organisations.
Well, great. Thank you very much for talking about yourself and sharing some of your experiences.
I much prefer talking about my organisation than talking about myself, Marcus, but it was a pleasure, and you didn't grill me too much, so I'm pleased about that. It wasn't as scary as I thought it might be.
No, this is a chat, and you know, it's always great to hear about other people's insights and thoughts. And you know, I think everyone's been through you know, I suppose everyone's been through, well, not everyone, I don't know if everyone has, but I think many people have done some self-reflection during these times, because we've had time, especially the first lockdown, you know, when everyone was talking about what do you do with your time, and you know, was clapping on the doorsteps and all the rest of it. And you know, I feel that things are slightly, I mean, whatever normal means, but you know, are starting to get back to some kind of normality of business as usual things happening. But you know, I'm sure all of us have learned something through. I've got to use the word journey, the journey we've been through, and you know, probably impact us on the future. I would imagine the challenge will be organisations learning from that experience, not just us,
Yeah.
but you know, the chief executive and the senior leadership board and all the rest of it, all of them learning as well, and not reverting back to type.
I was going to say, it's very easy, isn't it, for people to go, oh, breathe a big sigh of relief and we'll just go back to exactly what it was like before. And I just think that there'll be, you know, too much of a movement to allow that to happen. But I hope that leaders of organisations are open to working differently and viewing things, you know, in a slightly different way. And I hope we don't lose the learning. And I particularly think in the public sector, you know, sometimes it can take us a while to catch up in terms of innovation and learning and quality improvement. And I really hope that there's almost a need to stick with a little bit of that pace for now, so that we don't all just take our foot off the gas and go back to how we were doing things before.
Yeah, no, I think you're right there. Yeah. Well, great. Thanks a lot, Carrie-Ann. It's been really good talking to you. Really enjoyed it. I think we've learned quite a lot from this, and I look forward to you grilling me next time.
Yes, I love it. Let's turn it round. I'll grill you next time. I'm thinking of the questions already.
Oh, great. I think. No, thank you very much for sharing your time with us, and you know, good luck, and I hope you know, you're able to continue doing all the different things that you do in such a great way. So thank you.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.